Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Srila. Good afternoon, Mahima.
Good afternoon.
Good evening.
Good afternoon, Ms. Chitra and Ms. Gayatri. Ms. Gayatri is there, Mahima?
Yes,
Yeah, she's
yes,
there.
and
And
good afternoon to you.
Yeah, so we'll
Chandra is also
start in a minute. We'll wait for some more, although I can see there are around 35 people. We'll wait for 2 more minutes to start.
sure.
This program is also being live streamed in YouTube. So those of you want to see through YouTube can go to Indian Anthropological Association at YouTube. It is being recorded. So we'll begin with the program today. On behalf of Indian Anthropological Association, I am Nilika Mehrotra, the editor of Indian Anthropologist, the Journal of Indian Anthropological Association. I welcome you all to this panel discussion being moderated by Dr. Mahima Nair. And I welcome Professor Srila Jova, Ms. Chandra Ramamurthy, and Ms. Gayatri for consenting to participate in this important discussion today. I am really grateful to all of you who have found time in these really difficult times. I understand how difficult it is for especially counselors to find time to talk to people on webinars. Today, I'll just, briefly give you the background for organizing this panel. I and Mahima have been in discussion about this panel for some time now. And it is needless to say what we are witnessing today in India is close to devastation. And I think it's a moment of collective grief. All of us are grieving. Whether we are grieving for our loss of our close ones, or just looking at the images around, looking at the news every day on the social media and the news media, all of us have lost members from our closer circles. And this kind of at least, I don't remember this kind of a moment, at least in my life, that, something of this kind we would experience. Last year, definitely, we had these kind of images from Italy, from US, from UK. But I think all of us almost took it for granted that these things will not happen to us. Those were distant images. And today, when the death and the grief has enveloped all of us, at personal level, at collective level, at institutional level, I think we need to ask ourselves, we need to, humanize the kind of stories that we are hearing every day. I think it is very important that we don't just count deaths, we just don't count people who are, ill, and are also suffering the effects of trauma, effects of disease. These are not mere stories. These are life experiences. These are people who are living every day, and they are without much support, because this dreaded virus has, robbed us of the basic support, the human support. Lot of people are lonely. Lot of people are grieving lonely in their houses because of legal protocols. We cannot actually be with them. The rituals have lost meaning. Anthropologists are very fond of studying rituals around death and grieving. But rituals, traditional rituals, have lost meaning. There is a new kind of a making of meanings today. There are new frames to understand what we are going through and what we are experiencing, and the kind of trauma it is going to leave with us in long term. So I think we wanted that there should be a discussion. It is not merely an academic discussion. Indian Anthropological Association is a body of professional and practicing anthropologists who are more interested in knowledge production. But I think today we are talking about emotions, we are talking about experiences, we are talking about expectations and realities, and the continuities in the system. I think that is why this discussion is important. And I'm really grateful to Dr. Mahima Nair, who has kindly agreed to moderate this session. She is a specialist on psychosocial distress. Her book From Sage actually looks at the linkages between the macro socioeconomic factors and the impact they have at the household level. So she's the best person to be actually, moderating this session. She'll be introducing the other three experts very soon. And, I pass on the floor to Mahima to, take on from here and start with the panel discussion. I'm very thankful to all the participants who have found time to be with all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I have to begin with thanking you and the Indian Anthropological Association for organizing this panel discussion and asking me to moderate this really important session on grief in the time of the pandemic. Professor Nilika has set the ground to say that, the kind of loss we are all facing and what's been happening. So COVID-19 has actually changed all our lives. It's changed the way we live. It's led to loss of health, loss of life, loss of well-being. And today itself, I was talking to somebody who's recovering from a severe bout of COVID-19. And she said that, COVID-19, she said COVID is unforgiving. And it has been unforgiving in many, many ways for several people, in terms of what's happened to our families, what happens to workplaces, how children are going to school, how we are working, and, who can we meet, how many people can we meet. All the decisions in our life are being now regulated by this all-encompassing virus. And then we all become controlled by the institutions in certain ways. Now, all this leads to certain things within us, and emotions is what we want to discuss and look at today. Pauline Boss spoke about this, that, how people wonder why we are feeling sad, anxious, angry. It's actually because we are grieving. We are grieving for the loss of our normal lives. Grief is not this one singular emotion. Usually it's associated with sadness, but actually it includes anger, pain, shock, sorrow, trauma. And if you see that there are many forums nowadays which are talking about grief, but I think because grief is so pervasive at this point of time, we need these spaces. We need these spaces to express our collective voices of grief and trauma. and to understand this phenomenon of social suffering. And I think social suffering is very, very, we can feel it poignantly at this point of time. Uh, this social suffering is being reflected in the medical as well as the psychological crisis that we are facing. And we are also looking, there are several headlines which we are talking about the next mental health pandemic, which is coming, which is already here in some ways. Now, but we need to understand this grief, because grief also has a purpose in everybody's life. And we need to discover the meaning if we need to move forward. And I think this panel discussion largely we've organized with the understanding that we want to make meaning of the grief and what's happening to people in this. And therefore, we have this eminent group of panelists who've been helping people through grief in the last year, especially, and helping them move through the process of healing. They're going to talk about, the understanding of grief. What is it? How is it being manifested in the situation of COVID-19? And how to take care of others and ourselves during this period. So I'm going to introduce all the panelists in the beginning, and they will take it forward, because I don't want to come and break their experience sharing. So any questions, comments that you have, please note them down, or you can put it in the chat box. We will take it up after all three of them have stopped presenting. So I am introducing them in the order of how they are presenting in the panel. Our first presenter is Ms. Chandra Ramamurthy. She's a psychologist, psychotherapist, and development communication professional. She has over 20 years of experience in the not-for-profit sector in public health issues, which range from HIV issue, AIDS, gender, domestic violence, child rights, ethics, and mental health. Apart from this work, she's also been a visiting faculty at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences and St. Xavier's College. She has been involved in developing content and training of community workers, as well as school leaders, to provide psychological first aid, which is really important in the time of disasters, especially for the low-income countries. She also has several international publications which are based on her work in the areas of grief and counseling. Thank you for agreeing to be a part of the panel.
Thank you.
Our next panelist is Professor Srila Jova. She's a professor in the School of Social Work in Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. Her areas of work and research include mental health, disability, and disaster mental health, as well as therapeutic interventions. She, along with her other colleagues, has initiated the first postgraduate disability social work program in India. She has also contributed several book chapters in peer-reviewed journals, articles in peer-reviewed journals. She has edited and co-edited several books on issues related to spirituality, culture and development, fieldwork instruction and social work education, the Indian experience, the contemporary Indian family, transitions and diversity. She is also a recipient of the Fulbright Senior Research Fellowship. Welcome, Professor Srilata. Ms. Gayatri KR currently works with Muskan. If you could switch on your video, Gayatri. She works with Muskan, which is a field action project of Tata Institute of Social Sciences. She works as a senior psychiatric social worker and has been working there for the past 6 years. She has found the work here inspiring because Muskan is actually a pioneer in the child and adolescent mental health movement. Apart from her work in Muskan, she has several years of experience in providing psychosocial care in healthcare settings, particularly with neurosciences, workplace mental health, and has also worked in research related to autism and attachment. Apart from her work and counseling, she's also pursuing a doctoral degree currently. Thank you for being here. Over to you. I think, Chandra, you can begin.
So thank you for the lovely introduction. If you can just give me a minute, I would like to share my screen so that people can see it. Can you just give me feedback if everyone can see the screen?
Yes, ma'am, we can see.
So thank you so much, Nilika ma'am, Mahima, for the beautiful introduction for all of us. I would like to start by saying that it's in order. I see some of the some known names and faces in the audience. So please excuse me if you are listening to me again. I have the opportunity to bore you once more because I think we met a couple of days ago on a different platform. Today, I'm just going to start with talking about grief. What is grief and some theories of grief. And then I will leave my two other eminent panelists to take this over. We are trying to give you a comprehensive idea about not only from a psychological perspective, but a sociological perspective, and as well very practical what to do and how to do. I try to make my presentation a little more interactive, so it will be nice if I ask a few questions and have people unmute and say yes or no once in a while. 20 minutes, I'm on. So I would like to ask y'all if y'all can quickly share what is the word for grief in your language. I know people come from very different parts, so quickly, very quickly. Okay. Someone? Anyone? Yes.
Shock.
Shock.
I'm from Odisha.
I heard one more apart from shock.
Sadness.
In Tamil, it is dukkam.
Sadness, dukkam, yes. Yes.
Santap.
Santap, yes. There are different words used in our language. But there is one that dukkam means sadness. Santap could be a little different from what we would try to box in as grief. So there are words, and we use words to express grief in different ways. And we know that India is not a homogeneous country, so we have different ways to express grief. Is there an image for grief? Can participants just close your eyes 1 minute, think of grief, and can you tell me an image that comes to your mind? Anyone? Yes?
Image of suffering.
The image of a suffering, yes. What are the...
Suffering from sadness
Suffering.
after losing something precious in life.
So there is sadness after losing something very precious. So there are images, and currently if you look at what is happening around us, we are bombarded with media images. First thing you open your newspaper or switch on your TV, you're bombarded with images of grief. People losing their loved ones, people in isolation, people begging for beds, people in different forms, especially due to COVID, in different forms of distress. So I am sharing my go-to image for grief. It's called melancholy. It's by Albert Girogi. He is born in Romania, living in Switzerland. This is a sculpture that is placed in a small park in a promenade on shore of Lake Geneva. So in a lot of ways, in art, in words, in poetry, in the way we are, also we express grief in various ways. And this is one expression of grief where it shows of hunchback person with complete hollowness within them. So it just shows the extreme feeling that comes with a grief reaction. This is also my go-to image because of my own loss, and it is a person hugging another person. We know in COVID times this has been a very big rarity. Grief is multidimensional. It is also multi-determined. When we say multidimensional, there's no just one side to grief. It is all-encompassing. And when I say multi-determined, that means there are various determinants of grief, which you all will see further on when the talk progresses. And these are not my words, it's Bodin. So what is this wonderful thing called grief that we are trying to dissect, trying to understand, and trying to make sense of? In its very barest form, grief can be determined or defined as an emotional response to loss. And I mean loss in general. It is just a response. Many languages do not have one word or one construct that puts grief in one particular box. You can't just put it and say, okay, this is it. This is very neatly defined, neatly determined. This is how we define it. And now we'll go on to other things. The term grief itself is from the Anglo-French word gref, which is derived from a Latin word called gravis, which means heavy, painful, important, carrying a burden. And all those are also very synchronous with are images of grief. You hunch back, you feel hollow inside, you feel burdened, the dukkham, the gravity of it. It is there. It's there in words, it's there in images, and it's also there in the definition. But overall, the definition is very firmly grounded in a cultural meaning. So what grief means culturally is different in different parts of the world, in different languages, in different expressions, also in different rituals and kinds of behavior that we exhibit. But we do have a consensus that this is grief. And what is that consensus? That it is a natural and a necessary and a normal way in which people respond to something very personal, something very painful, and a very traumatic event. So it is not something very light. We wouldn't use the word grief if it was something that can be just brushed away. We also have a consensus that grief is experienced by everyone in their own way, very distinct. And most survivors that are called, I mean, I do have a problem with the word survivors, but when you say a person who has gone through grief, they exhibit some or the following characteristics, and those characteristics are common. What are the characteristics? There is tears, there's crying, there's sobbing, there is changes in sleep pattern, a lack of energy, a lack of appetite, withdrawing from social interactions. We know so many people who have lost someone and they just withdraw, they just don't know, they just shut down, that happens. Difficulty in concentrating, difficulty in sleeping, difficulty in focusing in a task. You start questioning your beliefs, your spiritual beliefs, your religious beliefs, your career, job, life goals get affected. There are feelings of anger, guilt, depression, loneliness. There is a pervasive emptiness, sadness, and all of this happens. But all of this also happens with an occasional moment of experiencing some joy, some happiness. So it's not that the person is constantly in that state of mind or state of feeling. There are three terms that are interchangeably used: grief, mourning, and bereavement. And I'm making a distinction that grief indicates an experience of someone who's lost someone to death. So grief is very firmly associated with death. And it comprises of the thoughts and behaviors and physiological changes that come in a particular pattern, vary in a pattern, and also differ in the intensity over time. So the term grief can be applied to other losses, but it's primarily linked to the loss due to death. Mourning is a term that is a process actually that people go through in adapting to the death of a person. And the finality and the consequence of that loss are the person tries to understand it, try to assimilate the loss, and then tries to look at what can be done further. So the mourning is that process that defines that kind of an adaptation. And bereavement it defines a loss that the person is trying to adapt. So it is immediate. If someone has lost someone, then that bereavement is that initial process. Mourning can be longer. So it's trying to adapt to that experience or that change between losing someone and further adapting to life. Why are we talking about grief, loss so much today? Not only because of COVID, but everyone has experienced loss. Everyone grieves in a very unique way. And I will definitely say there is no timetable for grief. Most grievers experience all of these reactions. Some are profound, some are very immediate, some manifest some days after, weeks following a loss. And it takes time to return to what we call as the new normal. In many ways in therapy, we try and use that for the lack of a better word, new normal, weeks, months. Sometimes it takes longer. I know people who have 10 years down to losing someone and are still trying to adapt. So it's a process, it's long term. We don't know, there is no timeline. And normal grief, also referred to as uncomplicated grief, has all these feelings. But apart from all these feelings, it also has these cognitions, it has physical sensations, it has behavioral changes. So you'll find people who shut down, people who are angry, people who manifest a behavior, and also reactions in terms of faster heartbeats, faster anger reactions and bodily reactions to that. So it is a combination of all these. each grief experience is very, very unique. And that is the entire takeaway. You cannot compare one person's grief to the other. Each one processes it differently. Each one looks at it differently. Each one's reactions are very different. So it is very, very unique in its, it is as unique as, say, like a DNA fingerprint. You know? Every person is very unique. So it is very unique. And this is how grief looks like. I mean, we think, oh, this person has lost someone. This is how grief looks like. From the outside, if you haven't experienced any grief, we want grief to work very linearly and in different kinds, stages, and this is how it is, and the person has mourned someone for 6 months. But grief actually is very messy. It's very dirty, in quotes, unquotes. I'm not saying dirty in terms of a judgment word, but it is not a beautiful thing to see. It is very messy, it's very ugly, and it is all over the place. This is how grief works. It's all 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. And when we look at people who are mourning, who have experienced grief, and you want to see them on the other side in terms of healing, in terms of adaptability, then this is how it is. When we look at grief, it's zigzag, it is all around the place, it's not linear. Healing, if I can use that word, adaptation, is not also linear. The expectation and the reality are way, way apart. If they match, well and good. It rarely matches because each day is an adaptation. It's like an AA meeting. You go every day and hope that today is a good day in terms of triggers, in terms of living a normal day. So for a person who's grieving, each day is a struggle. Each day is one day ahead. So is grief a disease? Quickly.
No, ma'am. I don't think so. Grief is a disease because it is a short-term and a temporary dysfunction of a mental stress that has been occurred due to some disaster or the thing we are going through a situation.
I'm so thankful. That's really what it is. Grief is not a disease. Yes, sorry, you disagree with that person. Yes, tell me.
No, I'm not disagreeing, but I'm also saying that it is not a disease. It is emotion which changes according to the situation and condition of a person.
Absolutely. So though we say grief is not a disease, but if you look at further on, you see how people react to grief. And people react to grief as if it is like the person has got HIV, it's got leprosy, it's got cancer. Grief has mentions in DSM. It's not a disease. The DSM mention is for a distinction between grief symptoms and symptoms of depression. But grief is not a disease. It is a reaction, but also people's response to grief is very, very unusual. Is grief a problem?
I don't think so. It is a problem because it's maybe a problem because sometimes it may linger because due to some distress in their mind that they have faced in the past, and that is the result that grief is occurring much more, and it's take time to recover. So I think grief is sometimes somewhat a problem also for that, and so they have to go for some therapy or something with psychological treatments.
I want y'all to take these questions back and also ruminate, because when we approach grief, we look at grief as something that needs to be fixed, that needs to be put a band-aid on. We talk about lovely terms like psychological first aid. So first thing we want to do is fix people. As a therapist, I know that very well because I sit on the chair and they ask, when will I get well? What do I do? How do I get better? When do I get normal? So then when we go into that phase, we talk about grief being abnormal, grief being a problem that needs to be fixed. Grief is like something that needs to be gotten over with quickly. So if you look at in that lens of grief being a disease, grief being a problem, then we will not get into helping people process grief. We won't be in that space where we can make sense of grief, which is very important. And only by making sense of grief, ours as well as theirs, we can actually address it head on without fixing labels into it. Yeah. So before we go further, I would like to talk a little bit about theories, because this wonderful space of grief does not happen in isolation. As social workers, as anthropologists, as even psychologists, we look at theories as to why we have all these wonderful concepts in place. These concepts feed therapy, these concepts feed interactions, these concepts feed interventions as well. So some of the most common theories are what I'm going to talk about, and further on, my panel colleagues will also talk about how this actually makes sense in real life in terms of when we deal with our grief as well as the one when we're dealing with people's grief. So the first theory that I'm going to quickly skim over is Bowlby's attachment theory. Bowlby says that the goal of that attachment is to maintain an affectional bond, and any situation that endangers the bond gives rise to very, very specific reactions. And these are not mild reactions, these are really severe reactions. So the greater the potential for loss, the more intense and the more varied the reactions come across. Bowlby did this research primarily on children, and the 5 main takeaways that he had was that children had the need to attach to at least one primary figure. When they got continuous care, especially with the primary figure for 24 months, they were quite okay. They needed that continuous care. And if they did not receive that continuous care, that's when the reactions emerged. Affectionless psychopathy actually occurred in children when the attachment was disrupted. And when this disruption happened, the separation from the attachment figure happened, it caused immediate stress. It caused all those reactions. It caused psychopathy. Since every child uses that attachment relationship to develop an internal working model. So if we look at our childhood, our attachment to certain things, to certain experiences, to certain people, to certain objects have all happened because of where we were. And if that disruption happened, then we are in a place where that has caused some disruption within us. And that has also caused us to crystallize those grief responses within us. I'm not going more on the flow charts, because he did talk a little more about how this has caused passive avoidant behavior, how it has caused separation anxiety. So it has lot of merit into how we were when we were children. Nehemiah took a little different take, and he said it consists of loss assimilation and loss accommodation. So he told that we're trying to make meaning of the loss. We try to contextualize the experience by trying to give ourselves a lovely narrative, a loss narrative. So a griever usually uses that existential questioning and tries to reconstruct the identity in a way in which he can assimilate the loss or accommodate the loss, and tries to make sense of whatever he or she is experiencing. Why are these important? Because your attachment theory, the way we are reconstructing, are all also typical responses as to how that person are responses that the person shows during a grief cycle. It is also how a therapist, a social worker, or a helper also sees those reactions and tries to make some kind of meaning of those reactions to help that person in front of us. So it talks about pre-loss, talks about how they engage in meaning making and how a new meaning can be useful. Strobe talked about a dual process model, and he says that the griever oscillates between a loss orientation and a restoration orientation. So he tries to seek proximity to the deceased. He doesn't let go of whatever's happened, experience, the person's memory, but lingers towards a loss reorientation also. So it is a yo-yo. He just oscillates. And slowly when the oscillation decreases, that's when probably there is some more trying to adapt to a new normal. So then this restoration, it comes to a more medium, more average kind of a curve. Then there is identification and adaptation. The grievers engage in dosing. So when they become more and more comfortable once this movement kind of comes to a settling kind of. So it just is zigzag. And when I talk about grief being messy, this is how messy it is. 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. It can be as messy as that. So you have reminders of the loss, then you try to accommodate that. You go back to another trigger. You be aware of the impermanence. You come back. Then you talk about possibilities. You try to rationalize it. Then you go 2 steps back. So this is what actually is also what people who go through grief describe. In continuing bond, Silverman, Nickman class actually say that the griever continues to bond with the deceased and tries to have that relationship despite a physical absence. So when you have responses like he's always going to be there with you, you will never lose him, he's in your heart, all those are common responses. Okay, not very well thought for a new griever, but when these kind of responses come, or this is the kind of thought process that happens at the grieving end, they're trying to keep that bond going, talking about the deceased, talking to the deceased, talking with the photograph in front of it, using that deceased as a moral guide. So trying to use that in various ways, to develop that. They Silverman also questioned linear models of grief that are supposed to lead to acceptance, detachment. And he said that we are looking at only behaviors that continue the bond and continue the bond with the deceased ones. And he does not look at it as a pathological construct, but he looks at it as something that in which it is normal for the bereaved to continue the bond with the deceased. And they have seen many, many cases in which, they've seen many, many cases in which the person still remains very strongly connected to the person who they have lost, and that connection, though virtual, though spiritual, though non-physical, continues to provide comfort and provide support, especially during the loss and adjustment phase. And this is what he talks about, that we don't leave our loved ones behind, we carry them with us throughout our lives, so we continue to have that connection. And the most well known talked about model, the Kubler-Ross model. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross worked primarily in palliative care. She worked with dying and deceased, and she came up with these 5 emotional stages that a dying person will go through after being diagnosed with terminal illness. And she also named the stages, saying denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. So we as therapists, as helpers, as caregivers also try to look at and slotting people in that. Oh, now this person is going through denial, now he's going through anger, and now there is bargaining stage, and now there will be acceptance after 6 months. Kubler-Ross work, though was primarily in palliative care, it is now used very widely. It is even used in human resources and management groups, and it's been like taken, adapted, tweaked, done in every way, dissected, and used in various other places to aspects of human emotion. It has also been applied to grief, though it's not a grief model. They are stages of dying, but it has been adapted for grief now, and people are talking about that as stages of grief. The nature and intensity of the feeling caused by the loss always is related to the individual and the uniqueness of that relationship. So whatever said and done, no matter what the adaptability, we cannot say that they are uniform stages. We cannot say that it will be same, that denial, anger, bargaining will be the same throughout, or will be even linear in the manifestation. So this beautiful curve that you all must have seen, you all must have read, you all must have dissected. So this is what Kubler-Ross actually put out. Kubler-Ross worked a lot with David Kessler. Rather, David Kessler worked a lot with Kubler-Ross, and they have written a lot of books until her death. Kessler was a part of her team, was a very active collaborator, and he has come out with his own take on the stages. And many professionals have tried to use her stages, apply them to loss, and she herself identified denial was, though it was a stage that was notified in her work with terminal illness, It is a common consensus among people who have worked with Kubler-Ross that her work has been misinterpreted to say that a person who has experienced death or divorce or some kind of grief related to that, there is a denial in those stages, but very rarely in grief that there is a denial that there is a loss that has occurred. And this is important because the denial is not about losing that person. You have lost that person. It's a reaction that how can it be? How did this happen to me? And that has been interpreted as denial. So the denial is not in its pure form that the person is denying the death, denying the loss, but it is a reaction of the person saying, how can this happen? I really don't believe it. It's an interpretation of that. David Kessler in 2007 said that one of the reasons of writing on grief and grieving was that everyone had taken the stages of dying and adapted it to stages of grief. Kubler-Ross always knew that the stages did work for grief, but it was not something that she ever talked about. Even in an interview with Oprah on primetime US television, she was cornered and asked, so now that you are yourself staring death on your face, would you say that this is adaptable for grief as well? And she did not make a distinction between one's own dying and the grief and loss of someone else, because she said dying itself is grief. It is grieving the life that you're never going to have. It is grieving that experience. She saw it as a fluid thing, as something that you cannot even put in boxes. So she was very cognizant of that, but then she didn't really probably have the energy to look at a rebuttal and try to change perception. I think I'm a little up on 20 minutes, so I'm going to say this and hand it over to Srilata, because David Kessler is very important to me and what I am doing in my life. So what he says makes sense and resonates with my experience of grief as well. He says each person's grief is unique as their fingerprint. And now everyone that they have in common is that no matter how they grieve, they have a need for their grief to be witnessed. And we know today that none of us sitting in this panel has escaped grief. If not due to COVID, sometime previously, some 10 years before, we all have seen death and dying, have experienced it. And it does not mean that we need someone to try and rest in it, try to reframe it, trying to make sense of it. The need is for someone to be fully present. When I am experiencing the magnitude of loss, I want someone to be present with me without trying to point out the silver lining, that everything is going to be okay, and trying to interpret it in different ways. So this has been my take of grief, and I'm sure Srilata will make much more sense of whatever models I tried to put. Over to you, Srilata.
Thank you, Chandra. And thank you, Indian Anthropological Association, for having us and for organizing a panel. So important for all of us to be able to talk about it and give ourselves permission to talk about it. So what I'm going to do is...
And your voice is not coming clear.
Oh, okay. How is it now?
It's better now.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So what I'm going to do is talk about, I'm going to talk about how do I locate grief in various contexts, and how do these contexts in grief, and how do I navigate through grief. So I'm going to share a slide. All right. At the outset, I also want to inform that the model that I'm going to present, or a conceptualization that I'm going to present, is a conceptualization that has been jointly done by Dr. Anita Rego and me, and primarily Dr. Anita Rego. So that's why I'd like to credit her for the diagram as well. So,
Srilata, you're breaking up again.
oh, am I? Just give me a second. I will change my internet. How is this better? Can I turn off my video for a while?
Yeah, maybe that so that we can hear you, we can see the slides.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Is this better?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, so when we talk about grief, I'm drawing from all the theories that Chandra had just presented. And we're talking about grief as located in a larger macro environment where there are social cultural norms, there is a climate of political environmental climate, where there are, there are...
Ma'am, your voice is
not better at all.
Okay, I'm just going to change my, give me a second, I will be back. Yeah, this is better. Is this better?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So we're talking about grief located in the larger socioeconomic and cultural climate where there are inequities.
Not better.
We are losing you again, Srilata.
I think you can put off your video.
Yeah, I've turned off my video now.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so grief occurs in larger, the environment where there are inequities, there's marginalization, and all of these intersect. But when we talk about grief, there are things really, grief is the way I experience a loss. A loss can be a single loss, I lose one member. I can have multiple losses. And in the current situation, that is what we are dealing with. We are dealing with multiple losses. What all do we lose? We lose people. We lose objects. That I have to shift home because I can't afford to pay the rent of this house. I need to shift house. We lose experiences. And some of these experiences are tangible that I can see, they are visible. Some of these are intangible experiences. One of my most fondest tangible experience is my father patting me on my head whenever he's pleased with what I'm doing. And that loss is something that cannot be described. What is my what are all my experiences of losses throughout my lifetime? We all have losses, whether it's been an object like a pencil or whether it is a being, and we've had not one but multiple losses. So what is that trajectory of loss? What are particularly in the context of COVID? What is the fear that surrounds me? What is the stigma that I have to experience? Whether it is quarantine, whether it is isolation, etc. Yeah, and it also can, and the fear can be related to not just getting infected, but if I don't go to work as a domestic help, if I don't go to work, I won't family. Yeah. Grief is like, because I'm attached to people, to objects, to my experiences, I go through what is known, and therefore, and when I experience the loss, I go through what is known as interpersonal vacuum. I may have ambivalence. I experience loss of purpose, loss of intimacy, emptiness, incompleteness, all of that. And perforce, I experience transitions in my life. One of the foremost identities that, one of the foremost transitions that we experience are identity transition, whether it is loss of an identity or I acquire a new identity. Social relationships, mobility or movement, I have to move houses because I can't stay in the company quarters anymore. Or I have to go back to my hometown because I can't afford rents on a single salary in the city. Also, transitions with regard to routine everyday life, whether it is finances, whether it is going to the market. Do I have the skills to go to the market to deal with finances? So all of these, so that takes me to this circle, which is skill and role gaps. Okay. Do I have knowledge? Do I have information? Where are the investments made in my house? Do I have emotional capital? When I say emotional capital, what I mean is, do I have, am I able to express my emotions? Am I able to manage my emotions? Am I able to lean on something? So that is also related to social capital. Do I also have, so what kind of relationships do I re-establish post the loss? And what kind of communication skills do I have or do I lack that I need to build and put in place? All of these influence the way I move forward to make meaning. So it starts with that, remember the person, I go through rituals like Nilika mentioned, and particularly grieving rituals, which are so important to help us move forward. Am I being present to reality, to current reality? Am I able to rebuild my bonds? Am I able to rebuild my old bonds that I haven't had time for? Am I able to build new bonds? Am I able to reinvent myself and accept both the sadness with hope? Am I able to look at myself with some compassion and empathy and with a sense of purpose? I move to reconnection where I don't have to let go of the person like Chandra said, but I move forward with the person I have lost, not without the person I've lost. This is also related to restoration reorientation of the dual process model. So I want to illustrate this diagram with an example. Okay. Sukanya is a 45-year-old woman who has been married for 25 years. So her marriage happened amidst a lot of confusion because there were dowry demands and there was a lot of refusal and hesitancy, and yet she was being abused for not bringing in adequate dowry and so on and so forth. And the abuse continued in the form of domestic violence. Her husband, the entire family, she and her husband actually got infected, and her husband took a turn for the worse, and he succumbed to COVID. They could not reach him to the hospital on time. She was very upset and angry that the company that he worked for did not respond to her request for help. And more so because she was all alone. Her son was in his grandmother's house. He was studying in another house. She had a 20-year-old son. She has a 20-year-old son. She is actually a well-educated woman, and but had to give up her aspirations to take up employment because of household demands, where the family said that they will not have domestic help and she has to do all the household work. So she moved, as her husband grew up the occupational ladder, She had to move from her in-laws' house to another city, which was, according to her, a welcome change. And then she moved to another. So she changed 2 cities before she came to settle down in her current location. She lost her mother when she was 13 years old. And when her husband died, what happened? Her in-laws blamed her for not providing adequate treatment. So on the one hand, she also had, she had experienced multiple losses of husband, of mother, of homes, where she had to leave 2 homes, and especially when she had developed a good social support in these cities. She also was grieving grieving for her experience of abuse. After the loss of her husband, she not only experienced sadness, but there was also a sense of relief that I don't have to go through abuse anymore in my life. I won't be beaten up anymore. And that was so significant when she narrated that. At the same time, there was regret. How can I say this? Okay. She also realized she was all alone because her son had to complete his studies. And she says it is not fair for her to dislocate her son or relocate her son from his place of education to, and particularly now when he was staying with his grandfather and studying from home. So the transitions that ensued included having to deal with an identity that she acquired, that of widowhood, a loss of identity, which is the suhagan that is often referred to. She had to move home because they were living in company quarters, and she had to move from that company quarters. So it also meant she had to find a place for herself. She was living a comfortable life because she belonged to a middle socioeconomic group. And she had to, the transition also meant that she had to adjust to altered lifestyles and having to manage her finances all by herself. Because of the situation that she lived in with her husband, and he would manage all the finances. So she didn't have any skills of managing finances or knowledge about where the finances were invested and so on and so forth. So she actually had to learn from the scratch, and something that she was not only unprepared for, but she was not also encouraged in the past. She also had to, the emotional toll that the ambivalence took on her was something that she had to deal with. In addition to this, the blame that she had was given, that happened because she didn't reach her husband on time for help, was also something she had to contend with. She had to reestablish lost relationships because of the fact that she had to move, and her domestic her domestic life itself took such a toll on her that she didn't have time, nor was she encouraged by her husband to maintain her relationship with her friends. She also had to negotiate with the family. Is she going to live alone? Is she going to go back and stay with her father? Is she going to live with her in-laws? Is she going to take up a job? So all of these were questions that she was faced with. All this because a woman cannot live alone. All the isms that relate to patriarchy and gender. Okay, so when she was going through these stages of remembering and rituals, she was able to. Now, unfortunately, like it is the case now, the rituals are not complete in by themselves. So at the most, they got to see. I mean, her son could not attend the funeral because he was with his grandfather. So she had to do all of this all by herself with support from her neighbors, that is her husband's friends. So and not only was she, and this is where she missed her husband sorely. She remembered the times when he would actually make life easy for her. She was also able to be present to the reality that I have to do something about my life. I have to take up a job. Her heart told her that she had to take up her job, but she was not very sure about where and how and what, particularly during the pandemic time. She had to rebuild bonds with her lost friends and others. She struggled to embrace both sadness, the regret because of the ambivalence, and carry hope within her. And particularly because she couldn't have her son with her, despite the son and her being in touch with each other every day. So the reconnecting was geared towards, can we look at what was good about the husband that she could remember? Like every person has good and bad, or what works and what doesn't work. What is it that worked for her about her husband that she truly valued? So while this is work in progress, we see some steps that attempts that she's making to move forward. However, we are aware that, like Chandra said, it's 3 steps forward or 2 steps forward and 3 steps backward. So this is work in progress. The oscillation is going to be severe, but and in this case, the grief was also triggered by earlier experiences of loss. So I'd like to talk about this Balls of Grief, which was given by Angela Charter, which she adapted from another source. So if you look at this circle, which is my world or your world, this is how the world is. When there is grief, the grief hits the pain button. So the grief consumes me. I feel that I cannot get over the grief. I just cannot move on. My life has come to a standstill. However, as I move forward, it's not just time, but as I move forward, my world, the world around me grows. And that is how I move forward. And that is why the support systems are very important. And instead of getting consumed by the ball of grief, I also look at expanding my world. And therefore, the chances of hitting the pain button weaken each time. However, when there is a trigger, the chances of me hitting the grief, I re-experience the grief all over again. And the chances of hitting the pain button is much higher. And therefore, the constant triggers actually enable me or ensure that I hit the pain button. So that is where grief experience consumes me. I'm just going to end with this quote because Gayatri is going to take us to the next section, which is I just want to end with this quote because that's the message that this model gives us. All beings have the innate capacity to be empathic and compassionate and be in action to generate results. Thank you. Apologies for the
Srilata, we've lost you in the end.
I was reading the quote. Did you hear the quote?
Can you just repeat the quote because we lost your voice in the end?
Oh no. Okay. I'll just share the quote. All human beings have the innate capacity to be empathic and compassionate and be in action to generate results.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Srilata.
Apologies for internet glitches.
Thank you, Srilata. Welcome, Gayatri. I will try and share the presentation. So can you see your presentation?
Yes, ma'am.
And am I audible, Mahima?
Yeah.
So thank you, Ms. Chandra and Dr. Srilata Jova. In fact, And very warm hello to everyone who are here. And thank you for having me here today. So I would like to, I would like to just draw in from what the earlier speakers had just set the stage for me. So for me, it's to look at how can we deal with our everyday experiences of grieving. Mahima, can I have the next slide, please? So what is it that so Warden has given us? What are the 4 tasks of grief, especially during bereavement? The tasks are accepting the loss, processing the pain, and to have a world without the person, both internal, make internal adjustments as well as external adjustments. And remember the person while continuing one's journey. And I think Ms. Chandra has brought in what it takes internally for a person, and Dr. Jova has weaved in what are the kind of external adjustments one brings in, one needs to bring in to, move through grief. Next slide, please. So we know at the outset that yes, when we have a loss, we recognize loss, and we know what are the responses. How do we react when we, when we know something is their loss. So we move into the different phases of loss, or we move into inevitable experiences of loss, and it throws us into extraordinary emotional overwhelm, and which some thread our system, and that is also added by the different social contexts that we're dealing with, which are
I think we seem to have lost
I
Gayatri.
think I'll
Yeah. Okay.
am back now.
Yes.
Sorry. So we must know that behind the experience of, we have series of emotions, and some of them, initial set of emotions are like, we know, sadness, protest, not okay, missing, and yearning for the person to be back home. Can the person just walk out of this room? Grappling with memories, grappling to hear the voice of the person. So these are some of the initial feelings that are attached to the loss. May I have the next slide, please? Mahima, may I have the next slide, please? Am I audible? Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
So, thank you. So it is important for us to know how our brain works. So this is your Dr. Dan Siegel has in fact demystified the way our brain works with a simple analogy to, our hand. So it's easy way to, it gives us a set of skills to work with our emotions on an everyday basis. So let us see how we can use this. So if I hope you can see me. If this is the way, if you fold your hand, it almost resembles the brain. So this lower part of the hand is my brain stem, or the sensing brain, which senses there is a threat, when there is an emotional threat or a physical threat in the environment. And just in the middle is the seat of emotions, the limbic brain, that the thumb roughly is which is showing the limbic brain, which is the emotional brain, which says, or like the what we were speaking in grief, it can be anger, it can be intense shock, it can be, because of shock, it can be sadness, so there can be fear, what will happen to me in future. So Some of these reactions of flight, fight are located in this area of or the limbic brain, which is something that is formed much as we evolve. So all our losses, our previous losses, our early attachment experience are deeply located in our emotional region, and we do not have language to this. This is largely the way we feel and we experience it in our mind as well as our body. And when you have, so this the upper part, the when you close the brain, this is like the upper part of the outer cortex of the body, sorry, the brain is where we, it's called the thinking brain, where we imagine, we recombine facts, we the ability to make decisions, the experience of compassion. So when the thinking brain, the sensing brain, and the emotional brain is in sync with each other, we are able to become whole, we are able to engage socially, we're able to make meaning of life, we feel connected. So this is something we constantly try. So this is a state a lot of times when we are working, we are productive, we are happily connecting to others, probably this is the state we are in. But when we are in a state of sudden overwhelm, when our system is overwhelmed, we flip. And when we flip, we do not have access to our thinking brain, or we do not know what to do exactly. We don't have clarity to our experience, and we can be thrown into distress. And what do we do when we are in this state of flip? So we no longer have access to our thinking brain when we are stressed. And the idea is, when we are in stress, how can we bring back and regulate? After regulating our emotions, we can bring our thinking brain back in sync with the other two regions of the brain. And that's when we can say we are more self-regulated and in a state where we can, like Ms. Chandra was talking about, how we oscillate between the grief and the transitions that we move, we make in our life. When we are moving between these, we are constantly thrown into this. How can we come back and make sense and move and have a new life ahead? So next slide, please. So very simple. This looks simple, but it needs everyday practice, and we need to tap into our own self to be able to get into everyday practice of nurturing through grief. So one of the first things, if we could look at, all of us have our own ways of bringing calm, bringing ourselves in the present moment. So when I am in distress, I'm all over the place. Can I bring myself to a place? Can I bring my body and my mind to a space of stillness? Can I look at what is this that I am hearing, the voice that I'm hearing? What is around me right now? What is happening to my body? When I'm sitting, where am I? Is my feet touching the ground? How does it feel when my feet is touching the ground right now? How does it feel? What is going on in my thoughts right now? So to be able to, so there are different ways to bring stillness, and I'm sure all of us know now we have access to different kinds of materials on stillness practices, and breath work is one of the easiest ways to bring stillness into the body. Now, soon after you're still is when you're a little more available to yourself to notice what is happening to my emotions. Because our natural way when we are in a state of distress is to either escape the situation or fight back. So when we are in that state, we are not able to engage. So how can you notice what is this? Can I presence my pain? Can I presence what is it that I'm feeling? Like, I just lost my friend, and even now at this moment, if I look back, I can just say that yes, I have this feeling of, you know, I lost and there's a void in my heart right now. I can feel it. So when I feel it is when I am able to see what is it, I'm ready to see what is it that I'm feeling void about. Is it the times that we've spent together? So I try to remember the times that I've spent with her. So noticing and then naming my emotion is a way to bring back the offline thinking brain to online mode. When I name my emotion, I tame my emotions, is what Dr. Dan Siegel says. And when I'm in sync with my brain, I'm more connected to myself. So, can I have the next slide, please? So, another way to do to tap into, source into difficult emotions is the next way to do is so often when we are in a space of deep emotions, people talk to us. When people talk to us, am I having my language regions in place? Am I able to talk to them? No, it's offline. There's no point talking when I am flipped. A lot of the newer, somatic practitioners have discovered, and new research has discovered, that the first system that takes in stress is our body. And therefore, and we don't know, it occurs below the level of awareness. So we need to again source our and scan into the body and see where in my body is what I'm feeling. In this moment, where in your body, what is it that you're feeling right now? Is it your heart? Is it your stomach? Is it your throat? Is it your eyes or face? It's a good idea to source your body and see where the feelings and what these feelings are informing you. Next slide, please. This is a slide I borrowed from Peter Levine, a very, very well-known somatic psychotherapist. Next slide, please. So now when I'm in a space of deeper awareness with my suffering, I feel guilty that I didn't do enough for my friend. I feel that I didn't do, there's a sense of guilt, or is a sense of fear, what will happen to me in this dark times? I'm not good enough. If I'm inviting different kinds of harsh emotions to myself, this is a time to look at and embrace those feelings in a very, so what are you doing that time? You're just looking at, you're just observing without any judgment. Just look at it. Here is this is the feeling that I'm having right now. So when I have that, can you just talk to your own self, that feeling that is in the mind that time? Tell that feeling, here I'm here to support you. Is there something I can do? Can you just talk to it with a lot of compassion? Can you feel along at that time? So when you do that, you are not thinking, but you're moving into a deeper space of heart space. So when you open to that zone, you are in a different space of connection to your emotion. So you will become more available to witness your emotional pain as you are moving across the different stages of grief, across your transition. So then you slowly start becoming available to review your relationship with the loss. It is important to then cherish what was, or bring back, how would you like to remember this person in a way, in a whole new way. So how can you not just the difficult, so what we first we are hard, our tendency uh, uh, when we have experiences of distress is to look at all that is not working for us. Can we look at what is also good? What was the best thing that happened to me? So it's not just looking, but you're going to identify. Remember, go back to a memory down the lane, maybe a week back, 2 weeks back, when my friend spoke to me. What is it that she spoke to me? And when I spoke to her, what happened? So what it meant. So what happened? Re-experience it. and also get absorbed in that experiences. So when you start doing that, you start telling yourself a more, you expand your story of your relationship in a whole new way, which is both all the difficult times and the good times that you have or had with her or with him. So eventually, these skills, if you can practice, these are simple skills that you can practice on an everyday basis to deal with your emotions, experience meaning, and rebuild your lives. Can I get the next slide, please? Yeah. So we all know self-care is important. So for all of us right now, we also need to look at some of these healthy practices, ensure that there is adequate health and nutrition. And like I said, when we may not be available for connecting, can you make yourself, the moment there is a stressful experience, we are hardwired to connect. And when you connect, you actually increase your ability to deepen your space of compassion, which is in your prefrontal cortex. So when you are connecting back to your emotional mind, you're actually negotiating with your thinking mind, and changes are happening. The moment you're retelling stories to yourself, there are a lot of changes that are happening in your meaning making regions of the brain, prefrontal cortex, and then that sets in the rebuilding of your, so the loved one who is in continues to be in the past as well as in your present in a whole new way. Staying connected is very very helpful way of staying whole. And like at the beginning, someone was speaking about how we need to have new ways of grief rituals. Rituals are so important, and I think we would also probably evolve and figure out new ways of making those meanings to become centered through grieving. Next slide, please. So I briefly want to touch upon that the while we need, so the whole idea is to be able to help someone, we need to also know how to help ourselves. So I had this young child whose aunt, who was the closest to her, so she lost her father. She doesn't know her father has died in the ventilator. The family is yet to break the bad news, and she had lost her mother 1 year ago, and she is staying in someone else's house, is not feeling safe. So in every possible way she is threatened. How can you grieve in a new home? And when you are in this kind of a grief situation, how can you, it's like a crisis that you are in. So this aunt who was supposed to help was not able to help, because she went back to her own traumatic experiences of how she lost her mother at the age of 2, and her father at the age of 16, and her primary caregiver at the age of 21. So she is suddenly not available for this youngster. So so to be able to help someone, how can you tune into your own self to be able to help someone else? So psychosocial care needs that come along. The first, so the family, we were resourcing families to see how we can put in all the immediate, who can take charge of this child, where the child will go. The child is COVID positive. Who will be looking after, how sensitive this. So finally we managed to get a medical a nurse to come and stay with her and look after her. So how can you prepare this nursing staff to hold her through this? Then we managed to get more relatives in. So how do we bring in more ensure the psychosocial needs of this child to be able to cope with this situation? So while helping through this, we need to also ensure the context can be as least threatening and as supportive as possible. And then comes also the internal, much needed internal adjustments that need to navigate with the external adjustments. So so when you are with a person, or when I am grieving, or when each one of us are in grief, we need to have someone who can be with us, can be a witness to our experience. Like I said, someone who can not uh, tell us what to do, but can be in a non-judgmental listening space. So some the people have suggested models of companioning through the grief, especially in the context of hospice and people who are dying in the with threat, chronic illnesses. So that's something that I thought might be useful. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay. So while helping with someone, some of the most important, very connecting conversations. So when I am in the throngs of grief, I'm not thinking, nor I'm using my logic. I am in my seat of emotions, which are in my right brain. And when someone needs to talk to me, that person is connecting to me through my right brain. That's when I feel held. I feel that person is present and witnessing and is being empathetic with me. So a lot of times we don't know, because we are not, we're not aware of our own, uh, this is new to us. We don't know what to do. So it's sometimes it's, if depending on the boundary of, the emotional boundaries that you share with this person, you can always say, yes, I'm sorry for your loss. You can say that, I wish I just had the right words, but I just know I care, but I don't know how to express it. I may not know how you feel, but I am here to help in some way possible. I felt really nice when a friend wrote to me that. Sometimes it's okay to write that you are in our prayers. So you may also ask, what is a favorite memory? That's something eventually you can ask. It's too early to ask about a memory if somebody is in crisis. So sometimes you can, if you offer more emotional, more physical calming experiences like a hug. And we all need to, if you can say, I'm here for you, if you are really able to do that. And sometimes it's okay to just say nothing at all and just be there and non-verbally be connected. And so can I have the next slide, please? Far more important is to disconnect or stop the person from reaching out to you, or hurt the person or re-traumatize the person. So some of the, this is not an exhaustive list, some things could be like using the word at least, talking to the right brain, suggesting advices, saying that he's in a better place. She, criticizing, judging that person, and to be philosophical about it. There is a reason for everything. Are you still not over his or her, are you still not over this person yet? It's been such a long time. Or somebody was told that you can have another child. I mean, that's very cruel to say that. She was such a good person. God wanted her there. I know how you feel. Is it really possible? Each person's grief is so unique and so important, so personal to them. So it's far more good, better to be inquisitive, to ask, I wonder how you feel, rather than say that I know how you feel. Saying that, be strong. So also, being again philosophical, like she did, she came here to do what, she did what she came here to do, and it was her time to go. It can be a very premature response. So this is briefly about the skills of managing our everyday experiences of grief, and what we could possibly do, like a first aid to handle know ourselves more, and grief is an opportunity for that too. Thank you, Mahima.
Thank you, Gayatri. I think I'm still processing what all the speakers have been talking about. And I was looking at, there are multiple messages which are coming in, so I will just look at them. But I have to say that, the whole, I think it's overwhelming to see the kind of grief that everybody is going through and the kind of loss that people are experiencing. So understanding that what is grief, what are the various manifestations of how Ms. Chandra started explaining as to what is grief, and how this whole process of grief is, it's messy. Sometimes we ask our own selves, why aren't we getting over it? It's time we got over it, and we should go back to, how we were functioning. We should be perfect and we should go back to a routine. But we need to understand this. I think some of the words that I've taken from the presentation in terms of the messy, the oscillations, that we move forward, then we move backwards. So, and the entire social understandings of grief, because currently it's this collective grief that we are going through. So even if it's not direct, either it's coming through media, or we are hearing about it, or we are listening, seeing, and obviously grieving in an everyday manner. But I think this whole thing of understanding grief, and also how grief is mediated by various your social positions as well. So your income status, the kind of socioeconomic status you belong to, your gender, all of this has a has an implication of how you can deal with grief. What can you do about the losses that you go through? And in terms of, thank you for this word, in terms of self-compassion, because I think when we were discussing the panel, a lot of the things, the discussion centered around the fact that we have not been able to do enough, we can't do anything. There's this guilt about not being able to do enough. So I think it's very important that you spoke about compassion. I am just going to go through some of the comments. So there are people who've been talking about that. Yes, this is a very informative and helpful topic. That people who are talking about their own grief. Okay, and yes, so there are comments related to wonderful curative therapy and personal narratives. I think now I'll open up the forum for discussion. So if anybody wants to ask any questions. Okay, there's one person asking that how do you deal with the post-trauma? So I think all the panelists can address the questions that are being raised. So I'm going to go to the first one. How to deal with the post-trauma that is followed by the period of grief? Any of you want to address it?
Can I start? If then Gayatri and Srila can also add in to what I said. Now, I would like to know whose trauma are we dealing with? Is it individual? Because there are two sides to the fence. You're dealing with your own trauma, you're dealing with someone else's trauma. And with COVID, we're dealing with both, sometimes both at the same time. So when you are dealing with trauma and you're dealing with your own trauma first, it is important, like Gayatri said, self-care, compassion, and lot of kindness and time for yourself. Because if you don't take care of yourself, like Gayatri absolutely had it on the point, if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of someone else. And COVID is complex. At the same time, you're dealing with 2-3 people in the hospital. You're dealing with people in different ways. You're dealing with yourself as well. So it's not one direction, it's multi-direction currently. So when you're talking about that, you have to let grief settle to some extent. When it's new all the expressions, like Gayatri said, like Srila said, it's going to be manifest like a bigger tsunami. So you have to give time to let it settle to some time and take yourself to a space, to a safe space where you can take care of yourself before you deal with everything associated, everything that's thrown up to the wave. Yeah, Gayatri, am I right?
Absolutely. May I just add one more layer to this? Is that if we've had, say, like Chandra ma'am, you spoke about attachment, and if you've had early experiences of trauma, attachment injury, or we've had adverse experiences much early in life and it continues to be unresolved, and we are our disposition to this world, the way we engage with this world might be one that of with fear and that the world is an unsafe place, and then this pandemic brings in a whole new kind of real life loss that might give us, it can threaten and overwhelm our system. So that is when we probably have flashbacks, when our system is not working, we are completely having a nervous breakdown. So sometimes in situations like that we need advanced care. So if any of your dear and near ones do have that, that warrants for extra attention and extra mental health care. So the word post traumatic is used in a clinical context as well. Thank you.
I think, yeah, sorry, Srilata.
I just want to add that the kind of trauma that we see during a pandemic or any emergency situation is actually a normal response or a reaction to a situation that is abnormal. So it's not, so we need to kind of allay our own fears and say it's okay to feel anxiety, anxious, trauma, and sadness and grief, because the situation actually is something which is beyond our control. So here we'd like to, say it's okay to feel this way. Thank you.
I'm just going to one of the questions because it goes from what Gayatri was talking about, how to find that the grief is getting severe. What are the early signs to identify them? Like, I think Gayatri answered that to a certain extent, but if you want to take it up a little bit more, that when do people need, apart from self-care, when do they need to go for professional help or seek extra care?
Yeah, that's a very pertinent question. When there are situations you have enough support, and you are grieving, you are able to make sense of your grief, and the normal sadness, like Dr. Jova said, and we cry and we feel like we feel essentially safe to talk to someone, and that safety is experienced when we are in touch with someone you feel safe with, or so when your grief is something that is in your you in your control, in the sense that you feel there are periods I'm functional, I can continue with some of my work, not overwork, I'm only working, but I'm able to continue with some of my tasks. There are I recognize that yes, there are times I am having my memories about the person and I don't know, and I'm in a position to connect and take help. So that probably is an experience of normal grief. But when there is despite help, despite reaching out, that person is completely having a breakdown, is hyperventilating, not sleeping, basic functions are disturbed, not able to get back to work at all, there is a complete breakdown in the system. That world is dark, I feel alone, and experiencing intense emotions. These are times probably that person needs extra help. If Ms. Chandra and Dr. Jova wants to add something to it, please.
Very correctly pointed out. And I just want to add with what Gayatri said, that when it disrupts normal functioning. And that's exactly what the DSM has made the distinction between complex bereavement process and clinical depression. Grief mimics depression, and we've talked in different other forums about why it's so similar yet so different. So that's why it's important in new grief to give time to monitor the feelings, the symptoms, the behaviors that the person is exhibiting. And then, like Gayatri said, if it interferes with normal functioning and it has been persistent for some time, that's when you refer that person to a grief counselor, to a therapist, and those distinctions have been made clearly in clinical diagnosis by therapists, and that is well documented.
So, Ms. Chandra, since you're here, there's a question for you. In one of your slides, it says that grief is subjective. You've gone through the things, so it's a long explanation, but I think what he's asking you is to enlighten us about the context. So I'm not going through the whole this thing.
Yeah,
but
I love the fact that someone actually picked up Camus and used that. It's beautiful. It's a lovely example, and the example I'm trying to understand, and I hope I'm in sync with you, Mr. Chaudhary. I'm hoping it's a Mr. Chaudhary. Kamal is a unisex name, but it's because the protagonist of the novel actually got tried and the case went against him because of an expression. So when you say that grief means you have to cry, you have to show compassion, you have to show bereavement, you have to show remorse, that's when it takes it to a different other level of expression. So with grief, there is no hard fast. You need not cry. You will cry tears and buckets inside. You may still not shed a tear externally. We all wear beautiful masks and we still continue to do it. Everyone has experienced loss in this current room, but we still continue to smile. We still continue to say good morning, and we still continue to function. So that is how grief gets pushed inward. The expression of grief changes, and we may still have a trigger, and that may still give us all the tears, like Gayatri shared, today, that something comes up and you miss that person terribly. And that's when the grief expresses itself. It finds a way out and then it again goes back in. Like the grief bubble. It's all over. It's dissipated in the body. It comes into the forefront and it goes back. It's like a wave. You dip your feet, you take your feet back, it comes, kisses your feet and goes back. So I love the analogy. I love the explanation. And yes, we all will get tried in court for not crying for someone we lost, but grief is that subjective. It's as simple as that.
Thank you, Chandra. Yeah, I think that this understanding that grief is subjective is extremely important. There are some questions about, there is similarity in questions that which state that, how do we manage when we are not able to meet anybody? So sibling spaces, inability to understand, inability to perform the rituals, lockdown. How do we deal with this inability to, the normal rituals, like Professor Nilika talked about at the beginning of the session, that we have mourning rituals. And now there is a legal stopping of these mourning rituals. So these were our natural ways of coping and dealing with how do we then deal with this situation? So any of you can answer.
I will begin. I really don't have an answer for this because a lot of times the rituals also depend on what significance they have for me. They may have significance, and in the current day and age, rituals take on different, virtual rituals are very common. Recently, there was an article by Dr. Prabha Chandra and Dr. Santosh Chaturvedi about how grieving rituals have altered its form and how it is taking place. That may not actually give us a sense of completion, but nothing actually ever gives us a sense of completion. So it is something that we are socialized into. Yeah, so we need to look at these ways of grieving, whether it is digital or a virtual memorial service or eulogies, or it's very hard to kind of actually name it and say, yeah, I will be fine with it. I may never be fine with any ritual also. Yeah. the others want to add?
COVID has created a complexity in terms of ritual, and rituals do have method to the madness in terms of the coping skill of a person who's grieving. We all are mired in rituals, and a lot of family therapy sits in that space. But also we have alternates to that. We've had experiences where pre-COVID, where people were not able to get bodies. People have lost people in climatic disasters where there has been nothing to perform, not even ashes, not even bones. So we've had correct me if I'm wrong, Shri, there have been in the natural disaster space, there have been examples where people have not been able to perform the kind of rituals that they have. Currently, we have to borrow from every place that we can in terms of dealing with COVID. And that involves adapting ourselves to newer things, like Srilata said, adapting ourselves to the kind of vacuum and the kind of social support and the kind of people around us, like Gayatri said. So we are in the process of learning, because this is a new pandemic. It's a year old, and we are still learning about coping with complex losses suddenly, coping with disasters suddenly. This is a pandemic, it's a disaster where we have so many people, we have no place to bury them. So it is a very unique case, and we are still trying to find new norms and new rituals to replace the old ones.
Thank you. There's a question by Nidhi Bhandari, who says, I find it difficult to ask a question in my online classes of how are you doing? As a teacher during my classes, how can I effectively reach out to my college students so that they find some relief in this pandemic situation? Maybe Srilata, you can address that since you're directly in the teaching space.
It's like I have my heart in my mouth every time I talk to my students, because currently every student is going through something or the other, and yet we have to complete requirements. So I don't know what kind of a world we are living in. There are parts of me that says, I mean, when human life is at stake, why is it so important for me to ensure that that research is completed? Sometimes I just tell students, let's spend 5 minutes just sharing what we want to share. Let's take a few minutes to generally calm ourselves down and share what we want to share. So, or I just like to connect with you. I'd like to hear from you. Talk about anything that comes to your mind. So I find that creation of that space, something very easy to deal with. And then we all know that we have 5-10 minutes within which we kind of, contain all this, and then we can get on with business as usual. I know it sounds very artificial, but then it is the way it is. And this is what I found useful, yeah.
Naima, may I just respond to that too?
Yes, please.
So to that question, I was very intrigued because I feel there is a strain on that, that the blurring of boundaries as a teacher and that student. So normally so I think COVID has again surfaced this whole new need to stay connected to, people as human beings. So what is, discovering that new boundary of connectedness with your students, with everyone in a different way, I think is coming to my mind. I think that's all.
Yes.
I love that someone asked this, and please don't hesitate to ask, how are you? I think we're afraid of the response that will come, but I know if someone asks that, it makes my day. It really makes my day. So don't hesitate. Just ask, how are you? And just be there for them.
Thank you. I think, thank you. I mean, it's the simple questions that we all hesitate to ask. And then we overthink about things and we end up doing nothing and feel guilty. And this entire, in a lot of other disasters, we have this survivor's guilt, which family members face. And I think all of us as communities, as nations, as an entire population are facing this survivor's guilt. So, okay, I think people are also asking us to share your contact details. They may want to contact you individually, and there's a lot of There's a lot of thanks for sharing, and I think somebody has written, I believe, Somain, that I believe sharing and even listening unlocks new ways as to how we can adapt and get better to absorb situations. So yes, thank you for writing that. I think the whole purpose of organizing this panel was that. So okay, so we've got another question. I think last one or two questions, then we will have to wind up the session. So I will be facing grief, then how can I overcome this grieving situation? Can we heal ourselves from grief? Maybe all three of you can give some idea on that, and we end with this question.
I think that's what we've been telling, that we don't know whether healing is really possible. That's what Chandra said in her presentation. But we need to make meaning in life. And that is what I think we should work towards. Finding the meaning that, reclaiming is not the right word. Rediscovering ourselves from a different light is something that we really need to do. Because, as the cliched word says, I need to live in a manner that is meaningful for me and for the other persons who are around me, so that we move forward. I don't know to what extent we can move forward, but can I keep the person in my heart and walk forward? That's what I would do.
Thank you.
My quick response would be to just what came to me in that question is this whole reluctance, the resistance to experience pain. So grief brings that extraordinary pain, and why is it unique to us? Because we come into this world with a unique thumbprint. Our experiences can never be as same as the other. So our attachment experiences with early on too. So that defines how we experience rest of the world. So it brings in so if we are all of us, I think we try to manage pain, we want to get rid of it, but grief you know forces us to really look at, we don't really overcome pain. David Kessler says, I've just borrowed from that this lady who in the group says that I'm just so afraid of this pain that is coming in, so will this ever go? So how he responds to this: your pain is never going to go, but it will change. I mean, this is so it's going to give us new meanings. Something I thought. Thank you.
I would only say the same thing and reiterating that your grief will never go away. Anyone who attempts to even do that, it'll go deeper and it'll manifest as a post-traumatic stress disorder. We learn with grief, we grow with grief. Every day you change with grief. So when you lost someone, it changes you irrevocably. What you were yesterday is not what you are today and what you're not tomorrow. All of therapy sits there. So you have to, like Gayatri said, it is a pain we are worried about. Pain will lessen. You will learn to channelize the pain differently. The pain won't be overwhelming like the bubble of grief. It will become smaller and you'll learn to live with it. It's not that you'll never ever feel the pain, you will feel it. It will come as a trigger, it will go. But you will learn to live. And you will learn, like Srila said, you will repurpose yourself to be a different person. You will never be the same person again. You may say, no, everything is fine. I'm the same Chandra as I was yesterday. Something has changed in you. It may not be for the good, it may not be for the bad, but you're a different person and you learn to live with it. So all we need to do is sit, watch, see our own transformation and live towards whatever we are comfortable with. Whatever we are not comfortable with, we reject. If being a new person, you're isolating yourself, your friend list has gone down to 2 people, you're not on social media, fine. Whatever you're comfortable with is the new you, is the repurposed you, and that's exactly what David Kessler says, like Gayatri says. Yeah, perfect.
Thank you, Chandra. I think you've also addressed the last question which was coming up. Does, in any sense, the perpetual state of grief and pain give solace to the ones whose near and dear have died? How long can it keep on continuing? So I think you just answered that, saying that we are changed person and it will keep on. It
No,
does
but
keep
I
on
don't want to pose. I really want to make sure that everyone understands it's not such a pessimistic, hopeless situation. We all have experienced loss. If we look back, also we've lost a lot of people, and we are going to lose people. That is for sure. You know, we all come with an expiry date. I'm not making it to be a very pessimistic kind of a portrayal, but we will change and we will make something of it. So we have to look at models and look at helping strategies like what we discussed today to change ourselves, to try and live a more towards normal life rather than think about how much grief, how much pain, how long it will last. It will last. As long as I want it to last, it will last. If I want to change it, it's up to me.
So another last question of how do we factor in family here, as grief is often collective? So Srilata, would you want to address this in terms of the family? You're on mute.
I was just typing out the response. See, individual grief influences the family grief or the collective grief, and it's vice versa. The good thing about collective grief is someone somewhere will pull up and will pull themselves up and will pull others also up. But the point to remember and to note is, yes, all of us go through grief, and it's okay to grieve, it's okay to cry, it's okay to feel helpless, it's okay, and to give ourselves a lot of permission. Like Gayatri has put up on the chat, pain is there but suffering is optional. I am going to be dealing with the pain, but I have a choice not to stay with the suffering. I have a choice to go beyond the suffering. And that's why the collective grief, I mean, that's how people typically deal with collective grief, and maybe transcend that, maybe go past that, or maybe, repurpose. Yeah.
Thank you, Sri. I, in continuation of what Srilata just said, she had shared a poem with me, and I would like to share that with you. It's called Everybody's Losing Something. It's a long one, but I'm just dealing with the first and the last paragraph by Odette Katrak, which says, everyone's losing something. What did you lose today? Our routines have all gone haywire, taking our comforts away. And in the end, the person says, everyone is losing something or someone. We've all got a part to play, and hang on to the hope as we journey on, bruised, broken, but never losing heart. And I think all the three panelists have been saying that to a certain extent, that yes, grief is here to stay. There's pain, especially in this pandemic situation, which is like a war-like situation, which will continue for some time. We have to be ready to see that there's going to be pain, there's going to be grief. But how do we, yes, we experience the pain and the grief, we have to adapt, we have to be flexible, we have to be compassionate to others and to ourselves. So I think those are the key messages, and that, yes, that grief is messy and oscillating and it's not easy. And there's not going to be a simple this thing. And we begin from that. And thank you so much to all three of you, Chandra, Srilata, Gayatri. I mean, it's been an amazing session and a lot of inputs. And to everyone who's been here and asked questions, shared their experiences, shared their personal experiences, and been there for us throughout. Thank you so much. And I hand it over to Professor Nilika again. Again, thank you for organizing this session and asking me to moderate it. It's been a journey for me as well.
Thank you. Thank you, all the speakers. Thank you, Mahima.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. This has been an amazing session. We expected, something from this session, but seeing the responses of people, participants, the presentations were just, so eye-opening for me personally. And also, I think they served as really cathartic for many, I'm sure. And I can see that people have been really, they have felt really little light, I think, after listening to the discussion. I'm really, really thankful to Mahima, to Gayatri, Chandra, Srilata. I am so grateful to all four of you to make time for this. This is also for me a community making, because so many of us have lost people, but we should find others also who share compassion, who share empathy, who want to learn, who want to learn to deal with our everyday lives. So I think for that, I'm really thankful to all of you. But I have to also give my formal vote of thanks to the association which provided us with this platform, to the president of IAA, Professor Patnaik, who agreed to hold this session. My really grateful thanks to Dr. Avitoli Zimo, who is in the background, who wanted to be in the background, and she is the one who has provided all the technical support. Miss Lovina Shehra, who again gave technical input in terms of creating the poster, and many others from the association, all the office bearers. Some of them are already here, participating in the discussion. And I'm sure, this panel discussion, the way we are trying to air it through YouTube and through Facebook page, will reach many. I think the whole purpose of holding this, organizing this session was that, we want to tell people that we are not alone in this kind of crazy, muddy, madness that is going on. That all of us are, have anchors, and we have seen anchors in terms of civil society organizations, in terms of young activists who have been running around, in terms of social media being the medium through which people have been able to access resources. And I want to leave at one lesson that I got from my JNU TA, listserv the other day, who one of the we were trying to organize help for people in need. And one of the faculty members wrote that she lost her mother on 13th, and she had no help available, and she was looking for help. And but she wants to now share, how to provide help to others, how to connect. So I think within a week's time, she was able to gather herself and come to extend help to others. I think this is what the human spirit is all about. So grief is there, as all of you say, grief is going to last. We'll keep mourning our, loved ones. But I think the humanity comes alive when we come together, when we experience grief together, we share our experiences, and we humanize the stories. So with this, I think I thank all of you again, and it has been a great pleasure listening to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Deep gratitude. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.